to begin with, we have our chairperson, Dr. Zia Sultan Pradhan. May I request Dr. Zia to please take the charge from here on and invite our first speaker.
Good morning. I'm going to be the first speaker for this instruction course on OCT angiography. I'm going to share my screen now. So this is a basic course. It's targeted for people who have just started using OCT angiography, starting to look at images, not completely familiar with the technology, and sort of fiddling around with the machine, but still need a little bit of input on, how to get the best of the machine that they have. And there'll be 5 of us who will be dealing with different aspects of OCT angiography. Is the slide not moving forward?
No, it's not.
Can you check it once again? Can you disconnect it and connect it again? Reshare it. Yeah.
Just a second. Okay. Now can you?
Yes.
So the outline of this IC will be, we'll first talk a little bit about the technology and how to read an OCTA report. We'll then discuss what the limitations and advantages of the technology are. And then my colleagues will discuss the usefulness of this imaging technique both in glaucoma and in retina. So what is the basic principle of OCT angiography? So you basically get an image like this without having to use any fluorescein or any dye. So it's pretty fascinating. It's a non-invasive method of delineating the blood vessels. And how they do this is fairly simple. So the hardware is the same as that of an OCT machine. But what it does is instead of scanning the region one time, it repeatedly scans the same region. So you then get images overlaid, and the algorithm will assess each point and determine what the variation in the OCT signal is. For example, I'll put a pointer here so that I can show you. For example, in this point over here, the OCT signal is very similar. That's called a low variance, and hence it means that that's probably a static point. Whereas at a different point over here, we are seeing quite a lot of variance in the OCT signal. This is not normal and is usually caused by something moving. So we're using motion contrast. The only thing that typically moves is red blood cells, and this helps to delineate the blood vessels. Now, after they do these repeated scans, they use algorithms. Different machines use different algorithms. The one that we are going to describe in this course is the one based in OptoView, which is the split spectrum amplitude decorrelation angiography. And you end up with scans like this of the disc and the macula. The scan of the disc is about 4.5 into 4.5 millimeters. The macula can give you a 3 into 3 or a 6 into 6 millimeter scan. And each scan will be separated into different zones, and you can calculate certain parameters in each of these zones as well as in the entire image. Now, the parameter that we most often use in OCT angiography is the vessel density, and this is nothing but the area occupied by vessel, that is the white area, upon the total area into 100. So the value is given as a percentage. So if you look at this inside disk area on the disk map, for example, you can see only about 30% of the area is white. So that's typically what we see in an inside disk area. Whereas if you look at the whole image, you would say that about 60% of it is white and the remaining is black. So this is how vessel density is calculated. Now, apart from giving you this image of the total retinal thickness vessels, the technology can also give you the vessel density in different layers. So for example, in the optic disc, you have the nerve head layer, which is from the ILM to 150 microns behind that. It will only give you the vessel density within this layer. The radial peripapillary capillary layer, which is basically the thickness of the retinal nerve fiber layer. It gives you the vessel density within that area. And lastly, the choroid. In the macula, again, similarly, you have the superficial macula, the deep macula, the outer retina, and the choroid. Now, why are these scanning regions important? Because if you want to find the vessel density in a particular area, you should use that appropriate layer. So, for example, in the inside disc, that is, if you want to find out the vessels within the optic disc, you should use the nerve head layer to best calculate this. If I use the RPC layer, you'll see that most of it will be black and you won't get an accurate calculation. So, for glaucoma, at least, we use the nerve head layer for the inside disc region. For the peripapillary region, we use the RPC layer, and for the macula, we use the superficial vascular plexus. This is what a typical printout looks like. So over here on this side, you have what I've been describing thus far. Adjacent to that, you have the en-face image, and you have the two cross-sectional scans, the B scans below. You can move these red and green lines to look at different cross-sections of the scan itself. Important things to note are you have the signal strength index on top, and I will be discussing that as it's one of the limitations towards the end of this talk. You can measure different parameters, but the most often assessed is the density. On this section here, I know it's small, but this is the area where you can actually choose what layer you want. So the nerve head layer or the RPC layer. After chosen, it will give you the densities in this scan, in this little chart over here. And those will change depending on what reference layer you have chosen. And over here, we have a heat map. So now this is important because this is not compared to normative data. We don't have inbuilt normative data for this machine as of now, but this is basically the hot and cold colors showing how much vessel density there is. So if you see the central area, it's about only between 0 to 20%. Whereas if you look at, say, this supratemporal area, it may be around 60 to 70%. So this is just a heat map for you to localize areas of poor vessel density. Now, if you look at this density map, this is just an enlarged version. Again, you'll see it gives you the whole en-face region, the inside disc, which is the OCT. Because this is basically an OCT machine, it will give you the OCT layers as well. So this is auto-calculated based on the ending of the RP Brooks membrane layer. It'll calculate the disc on its own and give you the inside disc measurements. The peripapillary area, as mentioned here, has a ring width of 0.75 millimeters. And then it can divide this area into 6 Gave heat sectors and give you the vessel density for each region. The software also can divide it into 8 segments, but you have to arrange for that within the software. Similarly, the macular printout is almost the same. The parts of the printout are the same, and you can choose what you want to look for depending on what the disease is. Now, this technology has been around for around about 6 years, and there have been a lot of changes over the last 6 years. And when you're reading this literature, it's often a little confusing because terminology has changed and the technology itself has changed. So we will briefly describe what it was and what it is now, so that going forward, based on the machine you have, you will be able to keep yourself updated with what is happening. So I will divide this section into the artifacts, because you have to rule out artifacts before you look at these parameters. What the retest variability is, because that's important for every new machine. And I'll talk a little bit about the signal strength index and the limitation of this particular machine. So when we first got the OCTA, this is a study we did maybe 2016-17, where we were comparing the diagnostic ability of OCT and OCT in glaucoma. And this is one of the first images in that paper which show you how many images were not usable because of artifacts. And you can see that it's quite stark that the OCT, whether it was the GCC or the optic nerve head scans, it was under 10% that we couldn't use. In contrast, OCTA scans were between 20 and 30%. At that point, we were not sure whether this technology is usable at all because of this high prevalence. And why is there such a problem with artifacts? The reason is obvious. Here, you're scanning the same region multiple times. So the scan time is that much longer. And whenever you have a higher scan time, it takes that much, the chance of getting artifacts is that much higher. So the most common artifact that you get is motion artifact. So as that raster line is moving across, it will give you this image on the left if there is no motion. But this technology is based on motion contrast. So if while scanning this region over here, the patient moves his eye, that area will have a high variable OCT signal across the line, and you will get an artifact called a line artifact or a motion artifact. These are very common. And nowadays, if they're in the periphery or in an area where we're not calculating vessel density, it is still okay to use this image. But if it comes anywhere within your area of interest, you can't use the vessel density as because of the artifact. Now, sometimes because of microsaccades, this can be a big problem, especially in advanced glaucoma. So a lot of time you get this kind of defect called the checkerboard defect, which has these sort of checks or a quilt pattern. And this is because the microsaccades cause high variability and this sort of vertical and horizontal lines across. And these are images that you just cannot use. Then you have floater artifacts. Again, you see this large area which shows like there's a dropout, there's absolutely zero vessels here, but that's because of the overlying floater, which you have to see in the en-face image. So before you actually read the values, just like in OCT or visual fields or any other imaging diagnostic tool, you have to first make sure that the test is usable, the image is usable. Then we have vessel doubling. So we know that vessels don't exist like this at the optic disc. You don't get vessels back to back. And when this is actually a problem in the post-processing, when the image is being processed to reduce artifacts, sometimes it gives you artifacts like this, and you need to redo the scan once to correct for it. And lastly, there are projection artifacts. So when light goes through or when light hits a vessel, some of it will be reflected, and you'll see that in the superficial vessel scan over here. A small amount of it is refracted. It goes through and bends. And when that light hits the RPE, it gets reflected back, just like any other. So when you look at deeper layers, you often get like a mirror image of, almost like a shadow of these vessels in the deeper images. These vessels don't exist, but they're just projected from the superficial layers into the deeper layers. So when you calculate vessel densities, the deeper layers are always going to be a little less accurate. And nowadays, because we've identified this, there are people who've done work on sort of removing the projection artifacts. It's called projection resolved OCTA, and this is currently being developed. Another advance that they've done is they've separated the capillaries from the large vessels. So once you do that, again, the problem with projection artifacts becomes less. The other advance in reducing the artifacts is, they've improved the scan time and things like that. So we now have high density OCTA. So the image on the left is what we used to use in 2015-16. And since 2017-18 onwards, we get images as good as the one on the right. So you can definitely see that there's improvement in the technology. And with all this, because they have been working at it quite a lot, we've seen that the prevalence of poor quality images has reduced. And in our later, say 2019 work, we have seen that with high density imaging and eye tracking, the prevalence of poor quality images has been reduced to around 5%, which is acceptable. So that's one step forward in making this technology useful in the clinics. Now we come to repeatability. Whether it is in retina or in glaucoma, we know that we have to follow patients up over time. We need to see whether the lesion is increasing or decreasing. We need to see whether the progression is occurring or not occurring. And the first step in that is to check the inter-visit repeatability. So the earlier version of the OCTA, when we looked at the repeatability, the test-retest variability was around 6 to 7%. And that is quite high. For example, in OCTA, it's 5 microns, which is very good repeatability. And that's why we've been using it for so long. They have improved the technology with these reference scans, and it has reduced now to between 3 to 5%. So we're in the right direction. I think there's still room for improvement in the test-retest variability, but there's definitely improvement from what it was. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is the signal strength index. So whenever you have a parameter that you're looking at, you need to know, what are the determinants of that parameter. For example, if you have cup disc ratio, one of the big determinants of what the cup disc ratio is are the disc size. The bigger the disc, the more the cup disc ratio. Just like that, we looked at what the determinants of these vessel density parameters are, both in the disc and the macula. And what we found is, there was some variation with hypertension in one sector or diabetes in another sector, but consistently across all areas, the signal strength index was one of the big determinants of what the vessel density was. That is, if an image had a higher signal strength index, it ended up having a higher vessel density. And this is important because it was across all values of signal strength index. If you look at this chart, the signal strength index plotted on the x-axis and the vessel density plotted on the y-axis. Now, it's not like at any point in the signal strength index, this value levels off. As the signal strength increases from 45 to 55, the vessel density is increasing further. If you go to 75, the vessel density increases even more. So signal strength index becomes a very important parameter in the determining of the vessel density. Unlike in OCT, for example, in this same machine, the OptoView system for OCT, after a signal strength index of around 40, we are not seeing any change in the RNFL thickness. This is not. So you have to account for signal strength index in any study that you do, especially in patients of follow-up. If the patient develops a cataract and the signal strength index falls, you will also see a fall in the vessel density. And if you're doing a study, you have to adjust for signal strength index in all, across the scans. So to conclude, acquiring an OCTA scan is easy. It's the same as an OCT, but it takes a little bit longer. And with the improvement in the technology, there has been a reduction in the prevalence of poor quality images and a reduction in the test-retest variability. So with this little background, we'll now move on to how this technology is used in ophthalmology. We'll discuss its uses in glaucoma, and I've divided this into what the changes are in the superficial layers and in the deep layers. And then my retina colleagues are going to discuss OCTA again in superficial retinal diseases and deep retinal diseases. Okay, we'll start next with Dr. Sujani, who will discuss the superficial vascular changes in glaucoma. Sujani?
Yes. Yes, ma'am. I'm sharing the screen now. Is my screen visible?
Yes, Dr. Sujani, it's visible.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Sujani Shroff, and I'll be talking about decoding the superficial vascular changes in glaucoma using the OCTA. So we'll be answering these questions in this talk. The first one being, is the vasculature affected in glaucoma? If so, when does the vessel density reduction occur? What is the diagnostic ability of OCTA in glaucoma? Can OCTA, I won't be starting my video right now because my audio will become patchy.
Sure.
Yeah. So can OCTA identify progression and a couple of case examples in varying severities of glaucoma? I think it's not moving forward.
Dr. Shroff, any problem?
Yeah, it's not moving forward now. Let me just stop share and share.
Then reshare it again.
Yeah. Okay, so coming to the first question, is the vasculature affected in glaucoma? Yes, it is. This is a picture of, this is a normal visual field with a normal RNFL and the heat map on the OCTA showing the normal capillary density. So this is a glaucoma patient who has a superior field defect with an inferior RNFL defect, and it shows an reduction in the vessel density in the inferior peripapillary area corresponding to the superior field defect on visual field and inferior RNFL on the OCT. I'll just start my pointer. Yeah. So if there is a vessel density reduction in glaucoma, when does this vessel density reduction occur? So we know that the structural changes in RNFL precede functional loss to visual fields. But does the vascular changes also precede visual loss? So to answer this question, we have conducted a cross-sectional study on primary open-angle glaucoma eyes with defects which were restricted to only one hemifield and studied the RNFL and vessel density changes corresponding to the perimetrically normal hemifield. So for example, in this patient with a superior arcuate defect in the right eye, there's an obvious reduction in the inferior peripapillary vessel density and the inferior RNFL thinning. So in our study, we measure the vessel density in the superior peripapillary area and compare these vascular and structural measurement with those of the healthy eyes. So our study showed that the vessel density in the peripapillary and macular scans showed a reduction compared to the normal in the perimetrically normal sector. So this showed that the vascular changes definitely precede visual field defects in glaucoma. The extent of the vessel density reduction and RNFL thinning varied. So whenever there's a new machine which is introduced, the intra-visit repeatability, inter-visit reproducibility of OCTA or any machine is constantly done. So in OCTA, the coefficient of repeatability along the peripapillary sectors and the macula range between 4 to 7%. In glaucoma eyes, it showed worse inter-visit repeatability than healthy eyes. So what is the clinical implication of these values? This means that any change in the vessel density of less than 7% would fall within the test-retest variability and would be clinically insignificant. So OCTA is a new machine. So we always have to compare it with the existing standards. So the existing standards in glaucoma care is visual field and OCT RNFL. So there's a strong association which has been found in inferior peripapillary and macular sector with visual fields. And in glaucoma eyes with high myopia and in those with advanced glaucoma, the association of visual field parameters seem to be stronger with OCTA than compared to OCT RNFL. When we compare the OCTA with OCT RNFL measurements, the average coefficient of variation of the OCT measurements was 1.5, while that of OCTA was 4%. So this implies that the OCTA measurements were less reproducible than the OCT measurements. So the area under the curve AUC of both peripapillary vessel density and the RNFL thickness range between 0.85 to 0.95. So how does this reflect clinically? When we compare the ONH region, the peripapillary region, and the macular region on structural measurement and vessel density measurements, it was shown that the OCTA is not superior to OCT measurements in diagnosing POAG. So though the question of which came first, the RNFL loss or vessel density reduction has not been answered conclusively yet. However, the relationship between OCTA, OCT, and visual field relationships have been studied. So it's been shown that the measurement flow with the vessel density was found to be lower than the flow with structural OCT measurement. So in this study, we can see that the RNFL thickness and the GCC, the flow was at a lower level, minus 17.5 and minus 12.9. But compared to that of an OCTA, the flow level was much lower, that was minus 25.8. So what does this mean? This means that the OCTA may be potentially a better tool to monitor progression in advanced glaucoma. So Breda et al. Studied the OCT measurements in different glaucoma severities. So they studied the OCT RNFL, OCT GC IPL, and the vessel density by OCTA. So all the three parameters showed a significant attenuation with increasing levels of severity. But when they performed a pairwise analysis, only the vessel density was able to discriminate between each severity level, while the RNFL and the GC IPL were not able to differentiate between moderate and severe glaucoma. So coming to our next question, can OCTA identify progression? So this was a study by Shoji et al. Who have done a longitudinal study comparing the rate of macular vessel density loss in POAG and in healthy eyes. So they found that the rate of vessel density loss was significantly different from zero when compared to that of in the POAG eyes compared to healthy. However, the rate of GCC loss was not significant in any of the groups. So if you can see in this, the vessel density has dropped from 50 to 44, but there was not a significant change in the RNFL or the macular thickness. This study was done for a short period of around 12 months. This was another study done in our hospital where a study on 18 POAG eyes with a disc hemorrhage were followed up for an average of 2.6 years. This showed a progressive RNFL and a GCIPL loss in the disc hemorrhage sector and not in the other sectors. But in the OCTA, it showed progressive peripapillary and parafoveal vessel density reduction in both the disc hemorrhage and the non-disc hemorrhage regions. So this was a study which showed that the lower baseline vessel density was associated with a faster RNFL thinning. So in this study, 132 eyes were studied with mild to moderate glaucoma and were followed up for 2 years. It showed that with every 1% lower vessel density at optic nerve and macula, showed a decrease of 0.07 and 0.09 faster rate of decline in RNFL thickness. So there's another study which showed the larger FAZ area was associated with RNFL and GCIPL progression. So coming to a couple of case examples. This is an example. This is a large optic disc showing a large cup to disc ratio. It was a normal RNFL and a normal visual field. So this shows that the peripapillary OCTA report shows that the normal radial peripapillary capillaries on the angiography image and the heat map with the vessel densities. This is an example too of a 61-year-old female, right eye PACG and the left eye PAC. Her angles were occludable in both the eyes and an LPI had been done. The right eye disc was a medium-sized disc with a 0.75 cup to disc ratio with an inferior temporal RNFL defect. So we can see that there is an inferior RNFL defect on seeing the optic disc image. The RNFL on OCT RNFL, we can see the thinning. And we can also see on the OCTA images of a reduction in the vessel density. So we can see the reduction in the vessel density here. And an inferior temporal reduction on the index. So the example 3 was a 53-year-old patient with a capsular glaucoma, pseudoexfoliation glaucoma in the left eye with 34 pressures. The angles were open. A trabeculectomy had been done. The disc showed a medium-sized disc with a 0.9 cup to disc ratio with a bipolar notch. We can see that it showed an advanced it was an advanced glaucoma on the visual field and the RNFL and a decrease in the vessel density. So when we compare all these side by side, when we put the severity side by side, we can see that this was the normal. So this was the normal. Glaucoma showed a focal defect and a diffuse defect on the OCTA. This was an example of two PACG eyes, two PACG patients who had similar visual fields at presentation. So this was similar visual field at presentation. However, we noticed that the first patient had a higher rate of progression compared to the second patient. So when we looked at the vessel density, we saw that the first patient had a reduced vessel density of 39.5%, while the second patient had 49.59%. So when we to add a note briefly on the comparison of different types of glaucoma, all glaucomas, whether be it POAG, pseudoexfoliation, and closure, or NTG, showed a reduction in the vessel densities. In POAG, it showed the peripapillary vessel density reduction was found to be significantly more than in the macular region. Pseudoexfoliation glaucoma, the reduction of the vessel density was more than in POAG. NTG, normal tension glaucoma, the pathogenesis is assumed to be a vascular pathology. But most of the studies have shown that there was no difference in the OCTA measurement seen between NTG and high pressure glaucomas as POAG. So in summary, OCTA provides unique information about vascular changes in glaucoma that was not available before. OCTA also appears to be a better tool than OCT RNFL to monitor progression, especially in moderate to advanced glaucoma. OCTA also provides useful information about the risk for glaucoma progression. Thank you. Now, Dr. Shruti will be talking about the deep vascular changes.
Good morning, everyone. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My talk is going to cover the following aspects. Firstly, we are looking at what are the deep vascular changes in the glaucoma, what is the prevalence of microvascular dropout in different types of glaucoma, and how is this microvascular dropout is associated with progressive structural changes and functional changes. So to answer the first question, sorry, my slides are not moving.
You should use that arrow there. See, there's an arrow in the left bottom. Can you see on your slide? Yeah,
Yes.
use that. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. So to answer my first question, what are the deep vascular changes in glaucoma? So here we can see, firstly, we should see where we can see the best place, where we can see the deep vascular changes more accurately. The A1 image is an in-face image of an eye, and the optic disc boundary has been demarcated in yellow line. We can also see the peripapillary atrophic zone in this image. In the A2 image, it is demarcated in green line, the peripapillary atrophic zone. In the image below, we can see that the peripapillary atrophic zone is devoid of RPE. So when we looked at the same patient's OCTA scans, choroidal slab, here we can see the deep vascular changes and the choroidal retinal vascular changes more prominent and better than the surrounding area. So in this B2 image, we have demarcated the same. This is the area where the deep vascular changes were studied in glaucoma. So here, this is the choroidal slab of OCTA image of a glaucoma eye, where beta peripapillary atrophic zone is demarcated. And we can see a dark zone in the inferotemporal area in the peripapillary atrophic zone, where it is devoid of choriocapillaries. Though we can see the large blood vessels, it is totally free of capillary vessels. So this area has been defined as microvascular dropout. So microvascular dropout has been defined as a complete loss of choriocapillaries in the localized regions of the peripapillary atrophy. Some papers say that it is deep layer microvascular dropout, and some papers define it as choroidal microvascular dropout, though both are essentially the same. So this is an example of a glaucoma eye where the capillary dropout area, microvascular dropout area is shown in the orange arrow mark, and it is delineated in the yellow boundary in the second image. This can also be quantified. We use an ImageJ software to do the same, so which helps us to quantify the dropout areas. So how can we quantify this dropout areas? We use this ImageJ software, which is an image processing software freely available in Google. As soon as you install the software, you can see this toolbar. So we should import which choroidal slab has to be marked for the dropout area. Then set the scale. Once the scale is set, you have to use the freehand marker and mark the area which has to be measured. For example, we can measure the optic disc area, peripapillary atrophic zone, and the dropout area as seen in C and D image. Then press Ctrl M to measure the area to be measured. Area calculated is displayed in the results dialog box separately. We can also see the angular width of the dropout area, which can be measured using the same software with this tool. So microvascular dropout area has been detected as a true perfusion defect on indocyanine green angiography. Studies have shown that there is a topographic association between the location of microvascular dropout, its structural defects, and the functional defects. So to further see the significance of the microvascular dropout, the peripapillary choroid receives its blood supply from the short posterior ciliary arteries and is located anatomically next to the lamina tissue and the lamina tuberosa. Hence, the presence of microvascular dropout may indicate a compromised supply to the optic nerve head. This hypoxic damage induced by hypoperfusion at the prelaminar tissue and the lamina tuberosa may restrict the axonal transport of neurotropic factors by releasing the toxic agents. Hence, this can attribute for the progression in glaucoma. So, coming to the next question, what is the prevalence of this microvascular dropout, which is a novel biomarker in different types of glaucoma? So, Su et al. In a study said that there is 50% of prevalence of microvascular dropout in POAG eyes compared to controls, and POAG eyes with microvascular dropout had more advanced disease and they are more myopic, they had more focal lamina cribosa defects and thinner choroidal thickness and lower diastolic blood pressure. So when we looked at the prevalence of microvascular dropout in primary angle closure glaucoma, when compared to the severity matched POAG eyes, we found that there is the lower prevalence of microvascular dropout in PACG eyes compared to POAG eyes. Then this is another study of ours where we looked at choroidal microvascular dropout prevalence in PXF glaucoma compared to POAG in severity matched eyes. So we found here that the prevalence of microvascular dropout in PXFG eyes is significantly lower compared to primary open angle glaucoma eyes. So this is one of the recent study by Joe et al. Who compared peripapillary choroidal microvascular dropout in primary open angle glaucoma, angle closure glaucoma, pseudoexfoliation glaucoma, and found that there is no significant the choroidal microvascular dropout is significantly present in POAG patients in early glaucomas compared to PACG and PXFG, but there is no difference in moderate to severe disease in any type of glaucoma. That is, they are present in all types of glaucoma in moderate to severe disease. So coming to finally we are coming to seeing how is this novel biomarker microvascular dropout associated with progressive structural changes. So this is a study by Park et al. Who saw the association between microvascular dropout and progressive retinal fiber thinning. So in his study, he included 150 POAG eyes which had disc-hemorrhage at the he included POAGs of which 82 eyes had disc-hemorrhage at baseline and 68 eyes had no disc-hemorrhage at baseline. So they all underwent OCTA scans at baseline. When we looked at when they looked at the prevalence of microvascular dropout, they saw that it was higher in disc-hemorrhage eyes. That is, 38 out of 82 patients had microvascular dropout, and 20 out of 68 patients had microvascular dropout. In disc-hemorrhage eyes, when these eyes were followed up for 4 years, they found that the rate of RNFL thinning was more in eyes with presence of microvascular dropout. So progression was more common in presence of disc-hemorrhage compared to absence of disc-hemorrhage. And 77% in progressive group, 77% of eyes which progressed in disc-hemorrhage eyes had microvascular dropout compared to 10% which was stable. So in eyes with no disc-hemorrhage, 50% of eyes which progressed had presence of microvascular dropout. Here, this is an example where the patient had recurrent disc-hemorrhage with the inferotemporal RNFL defect and disc-hemorrhage. And when she was followed up for 5 years, it was progressive RNFL thinning noted in B1 and B2. This is baseline, and this is followed up at 5 years. And this is an image showing microvascular dropout. So, presence of disc-hemorrhage and microvascular dropout are independently associated with progressive RNFL thinning. Microvascular dropout may provide a biomarker for glaucoma progression. So, this is another study where 68 POAG patients were included, and they had microvascular dropout at baseline, and which they were followed up for 2.5 years. 22 patients showed enlargement in the dropout areas, and microvascular dropout enlargement was also associated with progressive RNFL thinning in the POAG eyes. So this is an example from the same case report. So here we can see the progressive RNFL thinning associated with enlarged microvascular dropout, indicating the hyperperfusion. There is a global thinning as well as sectoral thinning of RNFL. So coming to the last part, how is microvascular dropout associated with progressive functional changes? So this Joe et al. In his recent study studied choroidal microvascular dropout as a predictor for progression. So he included 80 open-angle glaucoma eyes in which 40 had microvascular dropout and 40 did not have microvascular dropout at baseline. It was a retrospective study, and they all were followed up for around 3 years. So 70% of eyes who had microvascular dropout had visual field progression. So he concluded that microvascular dropout at baseline, high IOP fluctuation at follow-up visits are the predictors of progression. And the presence of microvascular dropout is a warning sign for poor prognosis. Here are two examples. This is an example from the same study. The microvascular dropout present at the baseline. His baseline visual fields were like this, like superior, nasal, and central visual field defect with a mean deviation of -6.03. When followed up for 5 years, there was a faster RNFL progression, which we can see here and here. Both the event and the trend analysis showed progression. And similarly, when the same patient who did not have microvascular dropout at baseline, whose visual field defect was also like inferior central defect, inferior arcade paracentral defect, whose mean deviation was -5.03, was followed up for 5 years and there was no progression. This was apparently stable in both event and trend analysis. So to conclude, microvascular dropout is a novel biomarker for glaucoma and OCTA. On OCTA, microvascular dropout has a potential to predict the glaucoma progression, and longitudinal studies are needed to quantitatively assess the deep layer vascular changes over time. Thank you. Over to Dr. Chaitra.
Thank you, Shruti. I'll just share my presentation. So from glaucoma, we'll be now going over to retina presentations. Thank you for extensively covering how Octa actually helps us with managing non-invasive imaging of the disc and the retina. And I think Zia has already spoken about the basics of it. So I will be covering the superficial retinal diseases, primarily diabetic retinopathy and vein occlusion, and how Octa has actually helped us. I have no financial disclosures. So coming to the layers on the Octa, since Zia has already covered it overall, I'll go a little bit deeper into each one of the different layers. So now coming first to the superficial layer. Yeah, so it basically has a centripetal pattern around the FAZ. There is a continuous perifoveal arcade with regular meshes. The thickness is about 10 microns and the offset is 3 microns from the ILM. So the layers that you see here are the retinal nerve fiber layer, the ganglion cell layer, and the superficial inner plexiform layers is what is seen in the ICP. Going on to the DCP or the deep capillary layers, this has a more close-knit pattern of vessels distributed around the avascular zone. And it's about 60 microns. What you see here are the deep inner plexiform layer, the inner nuclear layer, outer plexiform, and the superficial outer nuclear layer. So here you're seeing a very close-knit pattern of the vessels. Then there's the outer retina. Here you normally don't see any vascular plexus. The offset is about 30 microns from the RP. Thickness is again 30 microns. And the layers that you see here are the deep outer nuclear to the external limiting layer. Here no vascular plexus is visible. And then finally, you have the choriocapillaris layer, which, as you can see here, covers the choriocapillaris and is about 60 microns from the RP, and it has a very coarse texture. Now, after these initial layers were described, they came up with another layer called as the middle capillary plexus, or the intermediate capillary plexus, which lies between the superficial and the deep. You can see it kind of has the features of both the superficial and the deep. Now, if you look at the different sections that you see on Octa, you have a 3x3, 6x6, and an 8x8 scan. And this is how much of the field of view that you get. So that's one of the major limitations, that we're not actually able to image the periphery, beyond the arcades using the Octa. But with montaging and higher scan areas, we are, getting there where we'll be able to eventually, I'm sure, image even the mid periphery. So salient differences between Octa and FA, and why I'm saying this here in DR is because we do depend a lot on these, other two imaging modalities. With Octa, we have the single most important advantage that it can be acquired in a couple of seconds or minutes. Of course, patient cooperation is very important, but it can be done quickly. It does not require an intravenous injection, and drug allergies, anaphylaxis is, avoided. And more importantly, it has a 3D nature, which means you can see each layer separately, which you can never do in a regular dye-based angiography. Which comes to the advantages of dye-based is that you can actually see the dye leakage, which is an important hallmark for several vascular abnormalities, because you want to see the neovascularizations, you want to see the microaneurysms. And major limitation is that it is two-dimensional. And also you cannot repeat it, every other visit that the patient comes in, it's difficult to do the dye-based angiography. So one advantage that I did not really mention in the comparison before is that you have a quantitative and qualitative analysis that can be done on these Octa images. A lot of these come inbuilt as an inbuilt software. This is the OctoView one, where you can actually look at the color-coded vascular density, and we also get it as an index, which means you can prognosticate, you can do a follow-up of these patients to see whether there is improvement or worsening of the disease. We are able to map objectively a flow area and a non-flow area. So objectivity is another important advantage, which is difficult in an dye-based angiography, where there's a lot of subjective analysis that goes into it. One reader would be very different from another. The angioanalytics tool also helps us to delineate membranes, and I think Dr. Santosh will be covering about that more in detail. And so this is how we get a color-coded map, the navy blue indicating where there is absence of flow. And you can see it's more diffuse, and the FAZ is very much altered compared to in patients with diabetes compared to BRVOs or vein occlusions, where the abnormalities are more localized. We also had an inbuilt software made where we looked at fractal analysis. Our team put this together, and I will share a couple of studies. Here, the blue again indicates non-flow areas, and the red indicates the high flow areas or the vasculature. So coming specifically to diabetic retinopathy, it helps us in analysis of retinal vasculature, whether it is new blood vessels, the vascular density, the dropout in both the SCP and the DCP. The FAZ also we are able to see very early, and we are able to pick out macular ischemia, and the irregularity of the FAZ is very well seen. With respect to macular edema, we're able to see microaneurysms and capillary dropout areas very well. I'll show you in some images. So this is a patient which has an NBE, as you can see here on the fundus image, and the angiography is showing extensive leakage. But on the Octa, we're able to describe the membrane. If you want, you can even map it out and quantify it to see response to treatment, be it with PRP or with anti-VEGF. Here again, a patient with NBD, you can see extensive leakage, but with the different segmentation that's possible with Octa, you can see it at the optic nerve head level, and even extending into the vitreous. This is another picture again of NBD at the vitreous level, at the nerve head, and at the peripapillary capillary level. So this segmentation is definitely very, very helpful, and you most often need to do it manually. The automated segmentation is also available. So this is the regressing NVD before and after PRP. If you can see in the panel above, the NVD is extensive, but post PRP you see it regressing. We are also able to see aneurysms at different levels, and especially with macular edema, we are also able to see it at the DCP level. This is another patient where we were able to see the telangiectatic vessels at the foveal avascular zone in a patient with edema. And important is that patients, even without any edema, we are able to show that the FAZ was altered even before clinical changes appear. So that means we know that the pathology happens much, much earlier in the course of the disease, and it might actually help us in better interventions, be it systemic or local. These are vascular density maps like I showed you before, and you're able to see what is the whole image vessel density, or if you want to see quadrant wise or sector wise, also it's possible. Now coming a little bit into the on-fast image, that also shows us a lot of detail, and it's very well comparable to a dye-based angiography where we see that pattern in cystoid macular edema so beautifully. It can be seen both again in the superficial and the deep layers, and the corresponding on-fast also shows the edema. Now comparing no macular edema with cystoid macular edema, we're able to see the manifestation across the different layers and in the on-fast as well, as against a normal, looking for FAZ with no edema. Now, this is something that we did using our inbuilt, our in-house analytic tool, and we also published it in the IOVA special issue of 2016, where we saw the contour map across the different grades of DR, mild, moderate, severe, and proliferative diabetic retinopathy, and we saw the vessel density and the spacing was similar in both the layers. FAZ also did not significantly change, but what we saw was that in severe NPDR and PDR, they had higher spacing between the large vessels, whereas in mild NPDR, the spacing was higher between the smaller vessels. So if you look at the DME across the different slabs of OCTA and compare it with the on-fast, this is how you're seeing it in the outer retina. And this is the deep DCP, and you can see it's so well compared. We don't tend to see the on-fast that often, but it is definitely helpful. And this is the superficial plexus. Now going over to the retinal vein occlusions, it helps us in assessing the vasculature at the macula and also delineating the sectoral involvement. Diagnosis of macular ischemia is quite easy, which is very common in these patients. Capillary dropout also. Again, we can quantify using the analytical tool into flow and non-flow areas. So this is a patient where you can see, the area of non-perfusion on the dye-based angiography, and subsequently laser was done. And if you compare it with the OCTA also, you can see how well the non-perfusion area is delineated in a non-invasive fashion. This is another patient, again, the superficial and the deep, and you can see the capillary dropout areas. Now, another thing that one must remember in patients with edema is that it can obscure the vasculature. It does not necessarily mean that there's loss of vasculature. And you can see that the vessels are now seen quite well after injection once the edema started resolving. So we need to be clear here that not everything that's not seen is actually absent. With resolution of the edema, the vasculature could be seen back again, improving the prognosis. So this is a patient with fresh vein occlusion as against a resolving vein occlusion. You can see the tortuosity, the dilatation of the vessels very well, and also resolution of the edema with respect with the treatment and given some time for resolution. Patients with BRV on macular ischemia are so well delineated on OCTA and very comparable with the dye-based angiography. And you can again, like I said, map out the area of non-perfusion. But because of edema in fresh CRVO, sometimes the vasculature may not be visualized as seen in this OCTA. So we do get a lot of artifacts, poor fixation because the vision is so low. So retinal involvement, but can be seen across all the different layers. So coming to future directions, yes, like I mentioned before, the field of view is rather small, so montage will help, and larger scan area would be required. And this is one of the devices that has good scan and gives good montages as well. This is a SwepSource OCTA platform, where you can also see, vitreous to sclera, very, very good resolution in the B scans. And 3 to 6 to 8, what we were seeing has now gone on to 12 by 12 scans. And once these are montaged, we're able to see very good images. This is by Phil Rosenfield. I borrowed these images, where you can see, the montage is so clearly showing what was thought to be an NPDR patient having dropout and neovascularization, which resolved with treatment. These are some of the other platforms that are available, the Zeiss, the Topcon, and the NIDEC. I'm sure others have experience with these. To conclude, OCTA is a non-invasive, repeatable diagnostic modality for retinal vascular disease. It does become extremely invaluable in understanding more than anything else the disease pathology, the morphology. We can monitor the pathology's progression and the response to treatment, and it adds to our angiographic understanding of retinal conditions so much more. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Zia.
Dr. Zia, are you there? If you're trying to speak, your mic is on mute.
Okay, thanks Chaitra for that. And we move to the last talk, which is Santosh on the deep retinal problems that they use OCT angiography for.
Good morning. Are my slides seen?
Yes, they are visible, Dr. Santosh. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Zia, for the opportunity. So after Dr. Chaitra's talk, I'll be talking more on the deep. Talking more on the deep retinal vasculature as well as the choroidal circulation, especially regarding the CNVM, the age-related macular degeneration. Okay. So one word on the different slabs, what was shown by Dr. Chaitra already. So these are the slabs which are important here, especially the deep retinal plexus and even the outer retina, wherein we don't see vasculature that either goes from the DCP towards the choroid or the vasculature that comes from the choroid towards the DCP. So all these layers are especially important in the deep retinal vascular disorders. So, and coming to angioanalytics, again, pseudocolor is extremely important here, wherein if you want to see what exactly is happening at the choroid level, especially the CCA layer. So when you put on the pseudocolor image, you can see what's really happening at the choroid level. So there's a clear contrast that is seen, and we can make out subtle CNVMs or vasculature at the level of CC layer. And we can even map these areas by even adjusting the contrast as well as the flow area. And we can map the flow areas by putting the dots around the lesion, and then you can measure the selected area and you can serially follow it up. And a word on the projection artifacts was already discussed. It's like a flow that happens on a static background when water flows up against a static background. So obviously there is bound to be a reflection that happens on the deeper layers onto the vessels of DCP and the SCP on the slab, CC slab. It doesn't mean that it's an entirety. It's a different layer that we need to keep in mind. Similarly, what happens is when you when you look at a CNVM and when you look at these layers, a CNVM which is there at the CC layer or the outer retina also can be seen even in the superficial layers. That is a decorrelation artifact, what we call. So we need to keep in mind these things when you're interpreting a CNVM complex or the lesions that arise in the deeper retinal layers. And there's a software development which is called 3D projection artifact removal, wherein once it's applied, you can see the vasculature more clearly, the superficial and the deeper vasculature goes off, and you can get to see the choroidal vasculature membrane more clearly. And there's another thing which is described wherein they have adjusted the slabs. They have kind of reduced the slab at different layers or added 10 microns to different slabs or 30 microns to the CC layer. So if you look at a CNVM lesion here, so when we adjust the slab here, when it's adjusted to the Brooks membrane, the CNVM can be seen in a totality. I mean, rather than seeing as a partial membrane, you can see the slab as a volumetric thing. So even a volumetric analysis can be done with most probably post image acquisition processing. So a few word on the macula, because it involves the deeper vasculature and it goes down to the choroid. So we had a study wherein we had done on Octa in macula different phases. So macula basically is the vascular phases increases stage 1 where you see subtle changes that are happening on the temporal side. And as the stages progress, you can see the dropout areas becoming more clear on the temporal side. The capillary spaces are more. I mean, the spaces between the capillaries are more. And when the right angle vessels start, you can see the right angle vasculature bends and superficial and deep. You can see these anastomosis more clearly. And when it goes to stage 4, when there's an RP hypoplasia, so that also can be seen, and the stage 5 also. you can see the SRMM developing, and you can see a clear-cut vascular membrane even in the outer retina as well as in the CC layer. So a word on PAM. PAM, as we all know, is a ischemic event that happens in the middle retinal layers. It's a PAM and AMN, both are linked together. So AMN is more towards outer retina, whereas PAM is more towards the inner retina. You can, when there's too much of an edema, you can't really make out what's exactly happening in the vasculature, but you can see some amount of vessel dropout in the DCP when compared to the SCP. And when it comes to old PAM, these vasculature changes are more clear. You can see a clear-cut changes in the vasculature, clear-cut dropout in the fine vasculature in the DCP layer. Coming to choroidal neovascularization, it's extremely important to even find out the subtle membranes that are there at the CCR outer retinal layer. So, and progressive scans can be obtained, and we can see the changes in the lesion. We can see what type of vasculature it is, whether it's a fresh neovascular membrane or an old neovascular membrane. So the different criteria described already, wherein they say that a fresh neovascular membrane has many minute tile capillaries. They are fully anastomosed, and they don't leave a dead end. They are kind of anastomosed to each other, so the arcades are very well defined. But when you look at old lesions, these are more filamentous types. They are long and they don't really anastomose, and they have a dead tree appearance at the termini. So when you look at a dry AMD picture also, when you go for an 8 mm scan or the 8x8 size, so the vasculature is really difficult to make out, and because of poor fixation. But when you go for a 3x3, these changes are more clear. So these don't mean any vascular changes. These are just artifacts because of the suspended particles in motion. So that means because of the saccades, we get to see these things which are seen as motion artifacts. So these are artifacts which have to be kept in mind and not diagnosed as neovascular membranes. Again, when we look at a geographic atrophy, because of the atrophy here, the choroidal vasculature is more clearly defined. So this doesn't mean that there's a CNVM membrane here. So these things have to be kept in mind, and any interpretation has to be kind of correlated with the OCT-B scan. Coming to CNVM, when we have such a leak here in the late phases, so nothing much is seen. Early stages, obviously we can make out whether it's a classic or an occult leak. So, but neovascular membrane on Octa is very, very well defined, and you can kind of follow these things over a period of time. You can even see how a classic CNVM looks like, or how a occult CNVM looks like, the different components of the CNVM, and the changes post-injection, post-follow-up. But the thing is, once we see post-follow-up, we need to again resegment and adjust and see the entirety of the lesion. Then again, a word on how we can map the lesion. So we need to kind of adjust the threshold, because if you do not adjust the threshold, even the non-vascular area is also coming to thing, and the flow area is wrongly defined. So we need to adjust the threshold, and we can need to kind of map the lesion, and then we can follow it up serially. So this is how a response to anti-VEGF happens. The vasculature kind of contracts, and once the vasculature contracts, it looks like a dead tree appearance, but the OCT-B scan needs to be adjusted to see where exactly the lesion is lying, because obviously the volume comes down. So this, again, we can map the size of the lesion and we can compare. Inactive CNVMs, as we already discussed, this is how they see. They look like larger mature vessels, and even scarred CNVMs. So when we encounter such a patient wherein you have an SRF, there's no clear-cut CNVM, and you see quite a great deal of outer retinal atrophy and large choroidal vessels, pachychoroidal vessels. So when you get to do a FFA and ICG, when we are nowhere, we just see an occult leak, but there's no polyps or deviation on ICG. So Octa can be helpful in such situations. When you look at a 8 mm scan slab, there is subtle neovasculation that is seen, but when you go for a 3 mm, so this neovasculation is much clearer. So even in a chronic CSR case, when there's chronic CSR outer retinal atrophy pachychoroid spectrum, so these cases also we can get to see the choroidal neovascular membrane, and because of the decorrelation effect, you can see these at the outer retinal layer itself rather than going in for a CC layer. Even color, pseudo-color also comes handy in such cases. And this patient after intravitreal anti-VEGF injection in a chronic CSR because of pachychoroid neovasculopathy, it beautifully responds to treatment. A word on IPCV. PCV, people think it's been assumed that it can be easily diagnosed with Octa. It's not that easy because the flow is completely different. But BVN in PCVs are 100% diagnosed, but polyps detection rate is quite varying across various studies. So here, if you can see an ICG, it's the bulb appearance of a typical PCV. But when you look at an Octa, it shows different pictures. So some are less bright, some are more bright, but you can see the BVN more clearly. So that's another case. If you see, this is the BVN and polyps at the end on ICGA, but you don't see polyps here. You just see dark areas. So obviously, these are low flow polyps, but the BVN is very clearly made out. So these are 3 mm and 6 mm images of a BVN and polyps and BVN. So 3 mm is more clear when compared to 6 mm images. Again, in the case of PCV which had received multiple injections and PGC, so we can see the BVN and the polyps here, but polyps are not very clearly made out, but mature vessels are more clear. So this is pre and post PDT and regression of BVN, and even the pseudo color images. When we look at this, you can see the more mature vessels happening over here over a period of treatment. And a word on UNFAS. UNFAS also is extremely helpful to know the extent of the lesions, and it is really helpful, as Dr. Chadha has highlighted, in diabetic macular edema, to exactly even correlates to FA. So when you look at an UNFAS image here, so we can see the PED, clear-cut PED over here, which corresponds to this area. And it is again the saccades that kind of causes like a flow area, but it's not in a flow area, but you can clearly delineate the lesions. And the word on VISTA analysis, because Octa only gives a vascular flow, it doesn't even really quantify the flow. There's been talk of quantifying the flow in 2016-17, wherein they're trying to vary the interscan speeds for 1.5 to 3 milliseconds. Here you can vary the speeds of the interscan, and then you can see which flow is more faster, which flow is slower. It can be done in SCP, DCP, even in choroidal circulation. So by this way, we can see which polyps are low flow, which polyps are more faster, and these can be treated accordingly. It's quite an academic interest thing, but it's really not coming to production yet, maybe because of the difficulties that they're facing. And BVNs are known to have relatively slow flow when compared to the retinal vasculature. So this variable vasculature and should be kept in mind when we are interpreting cases of polyps and BVN. So to conclude, Octa is an invaluable tool in retinal as well as choroidal circulation. A variable speed of circulation in different pathologies has to be kept in mind, and it is obviously comparable to invasive angiography. Interpretation should be extremely careful and keeping in mind the limitations, and then only diagnose these. Thank you so much for your patience here.
Thank you, Santosh. So we have 10 minutes more, and I just wanted to summarize. So we've listened to, the various speakers tell us about the uses in glaucoma and in retina. And even though I've been giving a similar talk for the last 5 years, the typical question people ask you is this ready for the clinic? You're showing us all these papers that you all have published, but is it still a research tool? Until now, actually, I used to say, yes, we need to wait. The technology is not mature enough, at least for glaucoma. But in the last 2 years, if you look at the improvements in the technology, it all of a sudden makes it, a feasible tool to use in the clinic. And that's basically because a big lacuna in at least glaucoma management was a tool to assess structural tissues after a certain degree of advanced glaucoma. So RNFL is great in the early and moderate disease, but the moment you reach a visual field MD of around -12 and you move into advanced glaucoma, RNFL thickness becomes useless. That's very different once vessel density comes into the picture. And it is for these reasons that clinicians have been sort of driving the industry to try and improve certain things about the technology to make it applicable to our clinic. So we still have, work to be done in terms of artifacts and test time, the speed that's required for scanning. But over the last 6 months, we've also got so much data on longitudinal progression in glaucoma, which we hadn't got till now. Glaucoma, typically you need about 5 years for you to decide whether a technology is, ready for the clinic or not. And in the last 6 to 12 months, we have quite a bit of data on whether OCTA has the potential to diagnose, predict progression. So that is, we've got baseline values from 5 years ago. And whether it is, as Shruti said, choroidal microvascular dropouts. We've shown that those who had this lesion 5 years ago progressed faster than those who didn't have that lesion at baseline. That is invaluable. Your treatment modalities will change, will be a little more aggressive. We only got all that information now. Similarly, Sujini showed us data about how baseline superficial vessel densities were better predictors of how fast the disease will progress. So that was one aspect of progression that they looked at. Secondly, can the technology, is the test-retest variability low enough for you to detect change? So if I repeat scans every 6 months, like I do for RNFL, am I able to show, a change over time faster for vessel density than I have for RNFL? That also has been promising data. And for these two reasons, I would say that now this technology, at least for glaucoma, is probably ready for the clinics. Clinicians are never going to be happy. They'll always tell you, oh, can you decrease the test-retest variability? Can you improve the quality of the image? Can you get rid of these projection artifacts? And that's a good thing. It's our, eagerness to improve patient care that helps industry work on these things. But I think that finally, at least for glaucoma, OCTA is probably approaching readiness for a clinic. I think based on Santosh and Chaitra's talks as well, they're again unhappy about how much area they can image. They also want the wider the field, the better. And I'm sure that industry will work on those aspects as well. Chaitra, Santosh, anything else you want to add before we end the session?
I think one major question that always comes with Octa is, has it replaced your angiography for us? So I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, because more and more targeted PRP coming in, some for it and against it. So I don't think dye-based angiography, can be obsolete anytime soon, because Octa still doesn't have as much field of view as we're getting. So this leakage and things where we require specifically for treatment DR point of view, I don't think we can still do away with dye-based angiography. And I think another question that's asked very often is, which device? I think it's all a learning curve. We've taken so long to reach this long, like you said. So it's going to take time, and whichever device I think is accessible, we just need to learn on that device and make the most of it. So there is no one superb device. Of course, the Zeiss, Plex Elite is giving us the biggest view as far as the retina goes. Beyond the arcades also we're able to see with the montage. So that seems to be the best so far, but then it comes with the cost as well. So otherwise, I think we've been able to do pretty good work even with the OptoView. So whichever device, you can even ask for an upgrade on your OCT machine for some of them. So that was as far as DR goes. Santosh can add on AMD.
Yeah. No, as Dr. Zia was saying, to start with, it just started as a tool of interest and academic interest, basically. But as we had seen, it's a tool that now has come to rescue in many conditions, especially when we are in a dilemma, the outer retinal issues, and when we really want to see the subtle changes, even where angiography can't help, because either because of the miniature vascularity or the leakage that happens in an angiography, or even the systemic conditions that prevent a patient from taking up an angiography test. So these conditions, especially after the indeterminate CNVMs, the early CNVMs, the response to treatment, even the outer retinal issues, the middle retinal issues, it's really helpful. Octa is really helpful, and it's a go-to tool nowadays in a regular retina practice. It may be costly to kind of consider as an investment in the first go, but as the practice picks up, because this tool is inbuilt in various OCT machines. It's just a software upgrade nowadays, so it's not very costly. Also, people now are considering across the country Octa also as a primary thing. So it's especially Zeiss and some companies that are really coming up with these things. OptoView, which we have been using for a long time now, it's been really good, the inbuilt angio analytics and all. And as Dr. Chaitra told, each instrument is different. A person who is really comfortable with that particular instrument, yeah, it really helps. The other thing is, it's not a readout report. It's not a report wherein you just see a report and say that, okay, this is this. No, it's we need to sit at the machine. You need to see what's really happening. Because there are too many artifacts. It's a time-consuming thing. It depends on your personal experience, what you have learned so far with Okta, and only then you can give a report. If you see a PDF printout of a report that's been discussed by Octaview and Zeiss and all, it runs into some 15 pages. So it's not practically possible. But ultimately, when you make a report, you should know Okta properly, and you can't overdiagnose. So that's a thing we need to be careful with Okta. There are many things that can creep in. It's not an easy thing to diagnose, especially when you have a macular edema or things when CNVM is regressing. You can't base things on Okta saying that, okay, this is the end of it. Again, you need to fall back to your regular modalities like an OCTB scan or an angiography as and when required. But at this point of time, it is a tool of extreme importance in regular retina practice when things can't be sorted out on the first go. So when we have a doubt in retinal layers and choroidal layers, yeah, it really is helpful.
Thank you, Santosh. I just like to thank all the speakers for the work they've put in to make these presentations and all the wonderful examples shown by everybody. I'd like to conclude this session and hand it over to whenever the next speakers are ready.
Thank you, Zia. Thank you to AIOS also.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Zia, and thank you so much to all the speakers for keeping it on time. We highly appreciate that. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks, Prasad. Good job.